Now introducing today's host and MC, Kevin Crane. As AIIM's content strategist, Kevin authors ebooks and infographics on a wide variety of intelligent information management and digital transformation. He's the producer and host of AIIM on the Air podcast, which was recently listed on Forrester's 100 Best Channels podcast of 2021. Take it away, Kevin.
Thanks, Nina. It's great to be back for another great AIM webinar, this time with our friends from KnowledgeLake and Instinctive Solutions, really talking about the evolution of enterprise content management into the age of automation. Now, Nina, before we get going, I'd like to run our first audience poll to kind of get a sense of where everyone is today on their process automation journey. Do you have that poll? Let's go ahead and run that now. All right, with this poll, really what we're interested in finding out here real quick before we get going is where is everyone on their process automation journey? Are you really at the beginning of the continuum with really no efforts underway to automate? Specifically, are you still evaluating your options, or are you a little farther down the road with some processes automated but not all? Or who's at the other end of the continuum with pretty much everything automated with very few manual or paper processes? So if you don't mind giving us quick feedback on our audience poll before we get going, let's see where we're at in the automation journey.
Sure. So right now we have about 8% of the audience saying no effort to automate. Then we have 28% of the audience saying that they're still evaluating options. 63% say that some processes, not all, are automated, and 3% say everything is automated, very few manual paper processes.
Okay, well, that's good news. All right, so we have an audience that across the board, but certainly folks that are familiar with the topic and have had some success. So we'll try to drive our discussion to be fruitful for everyone, but especially understanding where everyone is on their journey helps us today during our discussion. And then look, it's an important discussion because despite the idea that enterprise content management may be a bit antiquated or ECM is dead, as they say, enterprise content management is still very much alive and a critical corporate management tool. There may be several reasons to stick with legacy ECM tools, but often doing so limits our ability to access new technologies, limits the amount of innovation that we can benefit from. That is until now. A series of technologies are changing how we work with information and shifting our ECM systems from strictly an archive and compliance tool to one that's much more than that, a true automation platform that can drive significant improvements in organizational performance in ways that really matter. And that's what we'll be discussing in today's webinar, the evolution underway that's driving ECM into the age of automation. We'll explore why ECM was never really an ideal tool for automation until now and how that is changing, how technologies like artificial intelligence, robotic process automation, low code are acting as catalysts to automation and innovation with existing ECM platforms and content. And ultimately, 3 steps that we can take to transform our ECM systems into more intelligent automation platforms. And we have 2 great guests with us to explore how we do it. Starting with Joe LeBay. Joe is the Vice President of Product Development at KnowledgeLake. And Joe works with customers and OEM partners to integrate KnowledgeLake intelligent automation into vertically oriented business applications and solutions. Prior to joining KnowledgeLake, Joe was the founder and CEO of RPA software firm RatchetSoft. And joining us also is Dave Jones. Dave is the CEO of Instinctive Solutions and a past chair of the AIM board of directors. He's the strategic marketing leader at Instinctive Solutions. Prior to that, he held senior marketing positions at Nuxio, AODocs, and his experience includes roles at Highland, Konica Minolta, and Fujitsu. So Joe and Dave, welcome to the event today. I'd like to start with you, Dave, if I could. From your perspective, why was ECM never really the ideal tool for process automation?
Hi, Kevin. Great to be here today, firstly. And I think we've got a really exciting conversation set up. And one that I've talked about an awful lot of times is why ECM really wasn't ever set, as you've said, to be that automation tool. For me, there are three reasons. First one is that ECM was always really about the document for me. And if you think about it, it makes sense. It was document centric. It came from document management in the first place. ECM was the natural evolution from document management. And it focused around document centric processes. So things like accounts payable processing, things like employee file management and claims processing. All of those processes that we know and love within the ECM space, they're all document centric, but most processes within a business don't operate like that. Yeah, for most processes, documents are part of the process, but not all of it. And most processes today need more than one document. And that in itself proved to be quite difficult for most ECM tools. Secondly, ECM tools seem to pretty much all focus on trying to be the one system to rule them all. That's a phrase that we've heard a lot of the times from Lord of the Rings, right? They felt that they were the most important system to the whole of the business, when in reality, actually, they weren't as important to a salesperson as the CRM tool. They weren't as important as the ERP to the procurement person or the bookkeeping tool to the finance person. You get the gist of where I'm going. The ECM system to all of those guys was just where you put your documents when they needed archiving or retaining for records management purposes. And last but by no means least, right, ECM tools try to do everything for everyone. So yes, they could do AP, HR, claims management, but honestly, did they do any of them as well as a dedicated tool for each of those processes did? I doubt it. They were the preferred tool for the IT department, maybe, because it allowed them to deploy the same tool across different departments. But I don't think departmental users ever actually really liked using the ECM tool. And if you've got a tool that you don't like using, it's not a good platform to build on from an automation perspective.
Well, let's talk about how all of that is changing, Joe. Let's get into the technical guts and feathers a little bit. How do technologies like artificial intelligence, RPA, low code, how are they acting as a catalyst to automate existing ECM platforms and content?
Great. Thank you for the question, Kevin. I'd just like to underscore a couple of things that Dave had mentioned, talking about ECM and why traditional ECM may not have been as successful as we had hoped it would be. Traditionally, ECM was really mostly about taking pictures, as Dave had said, which is great for archival and records management purposes, but that's pretty much it. Traditional ECM really wasn't good at making documents actionable or operational. They were just storing them somewhere. And OCR helped with that, but the information that was extracted was usually geared towards acquiring metadata and used for fully text indexing documents. And while that was an improvement, information continued to live within the confines of the ECM system. So you still had to go out and find it when you needed it. Now we have advanced technologies like AI, machine learning, RPA, and that allows us to take the information that's contained within those documents and make them actionable, meaning that rather than just taking the extracted data and using it as a means for document retrieval, we can now make that information available to the downstream systems where it can be used to help facilitate the transaction that a document represents, which is really what we care about, not necessarily the piece of paper, but what does it represent as a transaction? So for example, if it's an invoice, we want to pay it faster or we want to pay it on time. We certainly don't want to pay it twice. We can also use the information that's contained within these documents to kick off related processes in the systems that were, frankly, up until now, somewhat inaccessible. So using these technologies to understand what a document represents, being able to learn what new documents are and mean as they come into the organization, and being able to send that information to the people and the systems that need it on a timely and accurate basis is really something that we couldn't do reliably at scale until recently. So these technologies that we're implementing, we're moving from taking pieces of paper, taking pictures of them, to now being able to understand what they are and put that information in front of the people into the systems that are needed to facilitate it. And I think that's one of the things that we've now grown into and can do at scale.
Well, how do we manifest that? How does that play out in an actual business scenario, Dave or Joe? I mean, how can we extend automation activities beyond that traditional document focused process?
Well, I think if I can jump in first there, Joe, I think if you think about the way that people digitize processes within an organization, think about the organizations that you all work in, right? The chances are that the digital processes that you've got are just digital versions of your old paper processes. Someone tell me that I'm wrong, please. The reality is that digital transformation typically just looks at those existing processes and digitizes them, excuse me. And there's an old saying that if you take a rubbish, and I'll be polite, take a rubbish manual process and you digitize it, what you end up with is a rubbish digital process.
You can't polish rubbish is what you're saying?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, that's paraphrasing nicely. There's not a lot of thought involved in that conversion typically. And for me, that's a missed opportunity. All right, digital processes, all the tools that Joe just talked about, provide a great opportunity to rethink completely how you do things. And more importantly, why you do things and what you're trying to achieve rather than just the steps that you take to get there. And think about it, I'm traveling over to the AIIM conference next week, so it's the first time I'm getting on a flight in well over 2 years. But think about that process of checking in for a flight. We used to do it in the old days with paper-based boarding cards, which was a bit of a pain. The initial digital version of that upgraded that process to use scanners to read the card instead of a person having to do it. Then the paper cards got turned into digital ones on our smartphones, but nothing really changed. We still use the same concept of a card. It was just a digital card to get us onto the plane, completely document centric. But if you look at someone like Delta now, they actually use facial recognition at the gate to compare your face to your passport or your ID. And if it matches, then you just go straight through. No need for a boarding card, paper, digital, or anything. It's just completely simple, completely effective, and it removes all of the back office steps that are required to actually create that boarding card, to print that boarding card, to store the data that goes on that boarding card. Just imagine what that reinvented process could look like for every single process within every single organization out there.
Yeah, that's a great point, Dave. I learned a lesson a while back from an intern on a project I was working on. We went in and we were going to do a digital transformation of existing processes, and they brought in all the process veterans to come in and walk through what we did, and project managers started basically articulating a digital version of that same process. And the intern sits there and says, "Are we going to automate all the crap too?" And that kind of stopped us all in our tracks, because we were like, it's exactly what we were doing. We weren't taking advantage of this opportunity to rethink, reimagine what this process could be. We were merely just taking the manual process and digitizing that. And today, because we've got tooling that can be put in the hands of so many more people, especially the people who know the processes, and help motivate these people to think about what should the process really be, as opposed to, well, this is the way that we've always done it. There's an opportunity there to improve that process. And that's probably one of the most important takeaways for folks when they start down this journey, is to make sure you don't just automate the existing manual process. Take it as an opportunity to streamline it, clean it up, and make it better. And I believe somebody mentioned earlier before, about customer experience. Everything has to be about the customer experience. If you're doing something that's not improving the customer experience, either making it more pleasant, making it faster, making it more comprehensive so it gets done in one transaction, you're kind of missing the opportunity there.
I think, Kevin, just if I can jump in there quickly as well, there's one subtle nuance as well with the types of technology that Joe's talking about, right? RPA, AI, all of these, they're not trying to do everything all of the time. If you think about the old ECM systems, I liken them sometimes to a Swiss Army knife, right? You know, they've got a fork on there, they've got a little knife, they've got a corkscrew, they've got 101 different tools. But would you ever really want to sit down and eat your steak with two Swiss, a Swiss Army knife in each hand, one with a knife and one with a fork? You wouldn't. What AI and RPA are allowing you to do now is to create very, very small tools to do one thing, but to do it incredibly well. And then to bring all of those individual tools together to allow you to rethink that process and reimagine that process based on all of these individual tools that come together into a single solution.
All right, I want to talk about that reimagining in a bit more detail in a moment, but for now, we're really needing to reimagine the way that we do business as a result of the last couple of years. And of course, we're talking about the COVID pandemic. And I have another audience poll we'd like to run right now, Nina, about the impact of COVID on folks' efforts to automate. Are you at the point where, hey, COVID was really no impact to our automation efforts? It really wasn't a factor. Maybe are you in the place where you're still evaluating how you need to respond, still evaluating solutions and strategies? Did it just create a huge mess for all of your processes and you're just really scrambling? Or has it been maybe a silver lining, boosted your efforts to digitize and perform process improvements? So Nina, if we could run that audience poll, if folks would let us know where they're at on that continuum. Let's see where we sit today with that. What impact has COVID had on your efforts to automate?
Sure. It seems like they're still voting. Let me give them a couple more seconds. Closing the polls in 10 seconds, everyone.
10 seconds. What is the impact or has been the impact of COVID on your efforts to automate? Was it a silver lining? Did it help you get the support and kind of the lever that you needed to move forward, or did it really have no impact on your process automation efforts?
Okay, the results are in, and it seems 22% of the audience says no impact at all. They've never missed a beat with their efforts. 11% claim that they had come to a screeching halt and refocused their energies elsewhere. 3% said that they scaled back their efforts and they're still a mess. 11% said that they scaled back their plans, but now they're focused and determined to pick up where they left off. And 58% said it boosted our plans and accelerated our automation efforts the last 2 years.
Interesting. All right, so 60, 70% of folks are sort of on their way, and that's really great to hear. All right, so we would like to ask you to contribute to the discussion, certainly later in the Q&A. If not, questions for our experts here. What have been your successes, and what is your recommendation for folks that maybe are not so far down that line of automation, the continuum, if you will? Let's be sure to take that advantage to have an open discussion here in a few minutes. But back to Joe and Dave. Now, all right, we've been sort of exploring kind of a look back on ECM, why it wasn't a great tool for automation. I want to look forward now. What are the ways that we are finding success? Now, Joe, can you give us some examples of how intelligent automation is helping organizations today reimagine and digitize their core business processes and things that matter, like invoice processing, maybe employee onboarding, claims, something that perhaps that affects customer experience, as you were mentioning a moment ago? What are some good examples of intelligent automation at work today?
Well, let's take AP processing as an example. In the old days, invoices were digitally captured, usually after they had been processed, again, for records management and compliance purposes. But now with these IDP, intelligent document processing technologies, the invoices are being captured at the beginning of the process, where they can be trafficked through to the people and the systems required to facilitate the transaction that document represents. Previously, there were too many places in the process where we had to step out of the digital realm and go back into the analog world to really make it worthwhile. But now with IDP, the promise of straight through processing is being delivered. We're actually filling the gaps, so that whereas before we'd say, well, I've got to dip out of these processes and there's too much back and forth in order to do it reliably or to do it cost effectively, now we're able to fill those gaps so that we can get information to the people that need that information to do their work. We're able to get information to the systems that are required in order to facilitate what they need to do. The old excuse of our systems don't communicate properly, that's really out the window. Through the use of things like APIs and technologies like RPA, there really is no excuse to say, I've got 10 systems that participate in this transaction. They don't communicate with each other, so we're just going to keep it manual, or we're going to keep it, a quilt of manual and automated processes. And that's really not the case. And so that's probably one of the biggest contributions that these technologies have offered. Let's use an example maybe on employee onboarding. It's hard to find people today. It's difficult. The last thing we want when we bring new employees on is their first experience to be lackluster. They have expectations. They should expect their onboarding process to be as pleasant and as comprehensive as their online purchasing experience that they have today. There's no need for them to have to fill out the same information multiple times, whether it be to get onto payroll and benefits, or whether they need to schedule their training or order equipment. Information needs to be gathered once and repurposed where needed, propagated to the systems that are required to facilitate whatever it is that onboarding process is. And even if those systems are siloed, again, there are technologies that allow us to tie that together. Now, longer term, do we want to break down those silos? Absolutely. However, one of the lessons of digital transformation, in my opinion, is that you don't have to do it all at once. In fact, if you try to do it all at once, it's too much to swallow. So you want to kind of take steps that are consistent with the pace of your organization. However, that doesn't mean that you've got to wait for the organization to move. There are things that you can do today using these technologies to be able to kind of step your way down that path, see real tangible results, which will hopefully help the organization gather momentum to then take on some of the bigger things.
Can I just relate that back to the poll question that we did, Kevin? We
Sure.
talked about the impact of COVID, right? And we all experienced COVID in different ways, but the one thing that COVID did do was it introduced the concept of remote working to the masses. And I think what that's done across the board has given everybody a platform, a foundation to move forward. So even those people that didn't see their automation happening during COVID, what did happen was they got that technology platform in place to allow them to start building and start experimenting. And I think irrespective of the process that we talk about, or the document that we want to push through a process, what we have now, I think, within businesses is the technology platform to allow us to experiment a little bit more, to allow us to go in and try things like RPA and AI in a much easier way than we ever could do before. We've broken down some of the old procurement challenges where you had to go and get 17 quotations from 52 different providers in order to to buy a pen. I think we've broken things down. We're a lot more nimble and agile as a species, and that ability to experiment now in a much quicker, much easier, much more acceptable way is going to lead to the innovation and the process re-engineering and the process reimagining that we're all advocating here today.
And by the way, Dave, the vendors have also made it a lot easier too. They've adopted models that, would have seemed like heresy 5-10 years ago. Models based on pay as you go, pay for what you use. Some things that are based on, process times rather than from the RPA world. Everybody used to charge based on the number of bots. Well, that model is starting to disappear because people realize that it's not about how many bots I spin up, it's how much work do I get done and how valuable is that work. And the best way to get folks kind of in the door is to give them obviously the free trials and give them flexible licensing terms that works for their organization. Because as you said, lots of organizations have kind of adopted new ways of purchasing during the pandemic, and we vendors need to do a good job and continue to do a good job of adapting to that as well.
Well, it's the enablement of process improvement that I think excites me so much today, with things like RPA, with things like low-code solutions and approaches. And it's coming at a perfect time because the world today, as a result of what we're talking about, somewhat of COVID, but just the evolution of expectations today, are ones from customers that it needs to be a frictionless process. And the experience that customers have, employees are customers, your suppliers are customers. The experience that they have with your organization is what will set the tone for competitive advantage. And so it's the enablement of these process improvements with new technologies and new tools that excites me so much, which brings us to our third and final poll today. What keeps you from automating? I'd like to know from our audience, what keeps you from automating? Is it finding that the funding and support that you need to do what you want to do? Is that what holds you back in those cases? Is it really technology difficulties that keep you from automating? Are you finding that you're too reliant on legacy systems that don't allow you to really automate? Or is that not the case? Are you already finding that you have no trouble automating? But what are the issues that keep you from automating? Because of compliance, security, C-suite support, funding, technology. I'm curious to know. Nino, let's run that poll now.
Absolutely. Got 15 more seconds. And
We've
then,
got a bunch of them here. Okay.
yeah, they're coming in.
In the event that you are inhibited from being innovative, what is keeping you from doing so?
Okay, closing the polls now.
A lack of understanding of the concepts of automation, says Bill.
Okay, and our audience has said 42% are saying that identifying and prioritizing the business requirements, 19% leave it up to technological difficulties, 23% say no solution with our current systems and processes, 45% have a lack of right in-house skills and expertise, 42% say there's a lack of budget and resources, 39% say a lack of executive commitment, 19% say compliance, regulation, and/or security issues, and 19% say change in management needed to ensure proper uptake.
Okay. All right. Well, certainly across the board there. But listen, what I'm hearing there and what it's standing out to me is that an understanding of business requirements, getting the budget that I need for it, getting the executive support that I need for innovating. So that brings me kind of to my next question, Dave. What are 3 action items that our attendees can use today to really get the support and the budget and the resources that they need to begin transforming their current ECM systems into a more intelligent automation platform?
Yep, great question, and obviously very relevant given the audience participation. Now, I think there are 3 steps, right? So the first one we've talked a lot about already. It's about understanding what you have and what you want to achieve, but not really at that point worrying about how you want to achieve it. And I think that's one of the the hurdles that people hit very quickly is they instantly think, oh, I need to use this tool to do this, and I need to use this tool to. Don't worry about the tools in step one. Just figure out what you want to do. The tools come later. Once you've got that view of what you want to achieve, go talk to someone outside of your organization and outside of your industry. Go talk to that intern that Joe was talking about earlier on, and discuss your plans with them. They're going to come at things and the challenges that you're facing and the objectives that you're trying to get to with a completely different set of eyes, without any industry or organizational bias. Let them work with you to rethink those processes that you're trying to rethink. And then last but by no means least, you've got to get building. You've got to start and put one foot in front of the other and get moving. Start with small projects, both to gain experience with those new tools and to deliver some quick wins, but equally to find out if they're not the right tools that you need to be working with. If you're going to fail fast if you need to, but get in there and experiment as much as you can. And look, the reality is that transformation of any type requires a lot of energy, and it's by definition going to require change. But 3 simple steps to get you moving, and it's one of those things that you have to start putting some energy in before you start seeing the results coming back out.
One other thing that I'd like to add to that as well is that, especially because of ECM, and even automation, early automation to a certain extent, we're so focused on streamlining processes, cutting costs, making things more efficient. All important things, no doubt. But you want to get senior management excited? Talk about the revenue side of the ledger. Talk about what this is going to do for the business. How is this going to increase my revenue? How is this going to make us a better organization with which to do business? That's where I think, or take a look at opportunity costs. Were we not able to take advantage of a particular joint venture or do a particular acquisition because the technical lift was too heavy in order to participate? What does that cost you? So I think one of the things I'm seeing more and more of are smart organizations that are trying to sell automation more pervasively are looking at it more from the revenue side and the opportunity loss side, as opposed to just making things better, faster, cheaper, et cetera.
We are speaking with Joe LeBay, Vice President of Product Development at KnowledgeLake, and Dave Jones, CEO of Instinctive Solutions. We're here talking about the evolution of enterprise content management in the age of automation. Let's take advantage of having these 2 experts with us today. So we will be getting to a question and answers here in just a moment. So if you do have any questions for our experts today, now would be the time to start thinking about those, maybe posing them in the Q&A section or the chat section here, and we'll see if we can't get to them here in a moment. But Joe, how does KnowledgeLake help with all this? Can you give us an example of one organization that you feel has been particularly successful in using these approaches and techniques? What did they do? What were the results, and how can we do it too?
Well, let's first talk about what KnowledgeLake has to offer as an organization. We have a great IDP platform that contains all the capabilities needed to do intelligent capture of documents, information contained within, as we've been discussing. We've got the ability to process workflows, not workflows that we impose upon the customer, but workflows that work the way the customers need it to actually work. And we're able to touch all the people and all the systems needed that are party to a transaction. Most of what we talk about in the KnowledgeLake world has to do around transaction-oriented documents, the kind of lifeblood of an organization. And we provide multiple ways to secure those documents. So we make it easy. We have a low risk platform, a pay for what you use licensing model, and we let you play with it for free. Certainly on our website, we have a plethora of information, leadership pieces, and case studies that depict how forward-thinking organizations are solving the same kind of problems that we're talking about today. And of course, we have great people. We've got people that have been there, that have done that in all the areas that we've discussed today. So don't hesitate to tap that brain power, be it contacting our professional services and consulting people to find out how they can assist with this specific problem, or hitting us up individually on LinkedIn and having a less formal discussion about what we can do to help. We'd love to talk with people. We help organizations all of the time. We also learn constantly. One of the things that we do at KnowledgeLake that's pretty important, and doing it in a way that is compliant, is sharing information from project to project. So when we see something that a customer in a particular industry does that's really good, make sure that learning gets forwarded to other people in the organization so they can implement it with their particular clients. Even if it's in a different industry, there are these patterns that we see that can be that could be implemented for customers regardless of the industry that we're in. And KnowledgeLake is very good at spreading that information out throughout the organization. So every customer is basically taking advantage of all the learning we've done on the prior customers.
All right, very good, gentlemen. We do have some questions coming in from our audience. Sonia asked this, and this is a great question. What if it's a government department where there's no revenue? That's a good question. How do organizations like that build the ROI and get the support that they need for some of these solutions when it's a different kind of business model for a government department? What is your experience working in the government sector and how folks are addressing this?
Well, one area that I've seen is that there may not be revenue, but there are certainly budgets, and budgets are commensurate with value. And the government organizations that I've been working with, I've heard a lot of change in tone where they talk about the folks that they serve as customers. I think Dave mentioned this before, that these constituents, if you look at them as customers, all of a sudden there's kind of a different mindset, as opposed to this is something that we have to do because it's part of a mandate, as opposed to this is something that we as an organization, a department, want to do for our customers. So taking a look at budgets, taking a look at customer satisfaction surveys, these are things that are all helpful in making the argument for why we should do these things. So yes, revenue is important. I think it's critically important. But if you've got an opportunity to improve these processes and serve these customers better, as I said before, that's got plenty of value as well.
I think just to jump on that as well, Kevin, quickly, it's back to that point that we've made a couple of times, right? It's about identifying what you as an organization or a department or a person want to achieve. Now, for some people, that will be driving revenue, driving growth, driving innovation. For other people, it might be sustainability. It might be citizen engagement for a government agency. It really does depend on the scenario and the environment. I think the great thing about the technology environment that we find ourselves in at the moment is that it's equally applicable to all of those scenarios.
All right, I'm curious, guys. I'm thinking back to our earlier polls, and we have people that are sort of split on the continuum. Many folks are already fairly experienced with process automation. Some are not. So I have, I guess, two questions. One is, look, maybe I'm an organization, I have a bunch of old ECM systems, or maybe they're not even old, but they are certainly legacy ECM systems that my critical processes rely on. Some of that stuff's on paper still. These are absolutely mission critical activities that we do. I know I'm missing some of the benefits from some of the newer technologies. Where do I start if I'm just at that beginning continuum? Then on the other end of the question, how do I really look at these new technologies? I've been automating. How do I look at these new technologies and new approaches to really move the needle in terms of things like customer experience that is top of mind today, and organizational performance, maybe gaining a competitive advantage in our new norm? So my question to both of you is, where do I start? And if I've already down that continuum, where do I start to really make the advantages that are possible today?
Let me take that first one if I can do, Kevin. The sort of the conversation about legacy. I've got tons of systems all over the place. They're all mission critical. It's too risky for me to move off of them. Well, hang on a minute. You're probably running on 25-year-old software. That's more of a risk, in my opinion. And sitting still and doing nothing is more of a risk. than actually exploring migration to newer systems and ways to get better value. So I think that there's this chicken and egg scenario. It's like, oh, I can't move because it's too dangerous, but it's too dangerous to sit still. You've got to do something. And again, I think that's why realizing, as Joe said earlier, that you don't have to do everything all in one go. Identifying some smaller projects where you can get some quick wins, where you can maybe take some of the functionality or the data or the processes away from those mission critical systems, test them out in a new environment, test them out in the cloud if you want to go cloud, test them out with robotic process automation or AI or whatever it happens to be. But you're not going to fix the problem long term by not doing anything. That's the reality.
Yeah, and the process starts with asking people. I know right now process mining is probably one of the hottest areas, especially you see a lot of RPA vendors getting into process mining. There are some very high profile, very successful ISVs that are putting out process mining software. I think we're going a little too fast on that. You know, the idea of just hooking up sensors to my network and figuring out where the inefficiencies are. Yeah, I mean, I get the value in doing that. However, your people already know where the bodies are buried. Talk to them. Your customers already know where you're not that great. Talk to them. And once you start to get that feedback and you incorporate it in a systematic way, that's when, in my experience, the candidate projects present themselves obviously as to what they should be, as opposed to going through gigabytes of signal data going across the network, how many clicks, how many that. Your people know where it is. So if you're just starting out on your journey, it starts with a conversation with people who do this today, the experts.
All right, we do have a couple more questions coming in from the audience, from our attendees today, and please keep them coming. Let's take advantage of having these two experts with us for the next few minutes here. And both of these questions, I think, center on a similar topic. Benjamin is asking, does your RPA function by a true records lifecycle from generation to use to retention and disposition, etc.? And Tamara is asking, has your RPA factored into it the ability to stop a retention if there is a litigation hold? So tell us a little bit more about some of this records management, the functionality.
Those are great questions, Tamara and Benjamin. And the question leads me to believe that the way you've been marketed to about RPA is not quite accurate. RPA has nothing to do with records retention. RPA, and I'm a little bit of a purist in this world, I've been doing it a long time, RPA is the glue that ties things together. It doesn't inherently know how to do anything. It does what you tell it to do by automating things that already exist. So I would argue when you're talking about retention, records retention, that's a function of your repository. That's a function of your, let's say if your ERP system is responsible for that. It's a function of that system, not of RPA. RPA is the thing that triggers things. It's the capability that that kicks off transactions, that functions as the hands at the keyboard, if you will, and does it very fast, very accurately. You could do it 24 hours a day, and you could scale to hundreds or thousands of them. But it doesn't do records retention or records management in and of itself. That's a function of your repository, I would argue.
Yeah, just to jump on that as well, Joe, I think one of the things that I see RPA being used a lot for in records management is working with AI tools to go and look through vast repositories and all of those information silos that we talk about, to go and identify records that humans haven't physically been able to get to, purely because of the volumes that are there. RPA, as Joe said, is the glue. It's the joining piece that allows you to go off, process thousands of documents, bring them into the AI tool. Let the AI tool say, hey, that's a record. Well, that should be a record. Flag that to a human, because the humans still do need to be in the majority of these processes. But it gives you the scale, it gives you the autonomy to do that in a way that we've never been able to do because of the limitations of the human species.
Right, in that example, AI is functioning as the brain, making requests of the RPA runners to go and do things based on things that I, as the brain, have determined need to be done. Absolutely.
All right, another great discussion here with our experts today, Joe LeBay, Vice President of Product Development at KnowledgeLake, and Dave Jones, CEO of Instinctive Solutions. Gentlemen, I really want to thank you for your comments and your time today. It's been a great discussion. Now, let's turn it back over to Nina. Now, Nina, the AIM conference is next week in Denver. I know you're going to be there. Tell us more about what's going on.
Yes, the AIM conference is coming up next week. I am really excited. It's my first time.
You got your bags packed.
Absolutely. If it wasn't for this background, you guys would be seeing my luggage. But yes, I'm really excited to be joining, hundreds of professionals in the information management world. This year's conference promises to be unlike anything you've ever seen, and we still have seats. So if you're interested in still coming to the conference, please visit aimconference.com, or you can email hello@aim.org and we'll help you get registered. So yes, I'm really excited about that. And another exciting thing happening with AIM is our audience is going to get a sneak peek at this year's 2022 Industry Watch Report. AIM would like to give our audience a sneak peek, and this report combines independent research and data trends and actionable takeaways. So everyone in the audience, please head over to aim.org/2022-research to get a copy of the Industry Watch before it gets published live.
They will be the first to see it. Yeah, that's great.
Absolutely. It's a great takeaway. So as we're coming to a close, I would like to say thank you and use this last few minutes to remind our audience that we've recorded this webinar, so you can catch anything you want to hear again in the recap email that will be sent in the next 24 hours. A link to the resources for this webinar was put in the chat, and don't forget to take our feedback survey and let us know how we did today. Another big thank you to our underwriter, KnowledgeLake. Without support from our solution providers, we wouldn't be able to bring you educational programming like this webinar. But before we say goodbye, I'd like to ask Dave and Joe if they have any last minute closing comments or anything you want to leave our audience with.
All right, let me dive in first if I can do. I think the irony here that I want to leave people with is actually, despite spending the last 47 minutes or so talking about technology, this isn't about technology. This is about you guys and the business that you run and what you want to make that business do, how you want your process to operate. The technology is there at a level now where it can help you do that and achieve that. But don't focus on the technology, focus on what you want to do.
I agree with that. It's about solving problems. It's never been easier or more cost-effective to solve those problems, and it's never been less risky than it is today. So go out, dive into it, take it, bit by bit, but don't be afraid to get into it.
Great. And what about you, Kevin? Any last minute closing comments?
Well, yeah, look, the notion that enterprise content management is an antiquated technology or a construct, I think is off base. It's never been more important. And these tools that we're talking about that can automate processes are setting us up to really revolutionize the way that we work, either today or in the very near future. And so it's those organizations that tap into that ability to affect things that improve organizational performance, affect things that improve customer experience, will be the ones that gain competitive advantage. It's not just about saving and protecting information anymore. It's really about using it in ways that make a difference. And that was what we were talking about today, and we'll continue to talk about at AIM. And I think these are really important conversations in a forum with people that are really doing it in the real world, that are really vital and important today. So thank you everyone for being a part of that.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. This is Nina from AIM. Have a great day.